3 days before the world lost him, he was smiling at a piano. There was no hint of goodbye, no dramatic farewell. Just Neil Sedaka, relaxed and cheerful, crooning about good times and good friends like he had done for decades. To fans scrolling past, it felt comforting, familiar. Classic Neil. But then everything changed. Overnight, that joyful clip took on a completely different meaning. What once sounded like celebration suddenly felt haunting. A message meant to build excitement now echoed like a quiet farewell no one realized they were hearing. In the video, he sang with warmth in his voice, fingers dancing effortlessly across the keys. The same hands that helped shape pop history were still moving with confidence. He looked energized, hopeful, even playful. There was nothing fragile about the moment. And that's what makes it so difficult. Because just days later, news broke that the legendary hitmaker had passed away at 86. The same post that once had fans tagging their friends and laughing in the comments quickly filled with heartbreak. Messages shifted from excitement to disbelief. "I can't wait to share it with you again," he had written. At the time, it felt like a simple promise tied to an upcoming release. But after his sudden passing, those words hit differently. They lingered. They replayed in people's minds. Some fans even said it felt almost symbolic, as if he was unknowingly signing off one final time. Of course, there was no indication he knew anything was wrong. Reports later revealed he had been feeling ill the morning of his passing, but nothing publicly suggested a goodbye was coming. That's what makes the moment so powerful. It wasn't staged. It wasn't dramatic. It was just him, doing what he loved. And maybe that's why it hurts more. Because the post wasn't about loss. It was about joy. It was about music. It was about connection. And somehow, that joy became the very thing that turned into a global goodbye. But here's what makes that final post even more powerful. It wasn't random. It was part of something bigger. In the weeks leading up to his passing, Neil Sedaka wasn't fading quietly into the background. He was planning a revival, a reintroduction, a moment designed to bring his music to an entirely new generation. And he was genuinely excited about it. Sedaka had been counting down the days to the streaming debut of his 1976 album, Steppin Out, a record that marked a significant chapter in his career. Originally released during his era with the Rocket Record Company, the album completed what many fans consider his Rocket trilogy. But despite its importance, it had never fully lived in the streaming world the way modern audiences consume music today. That was about to change. For the first time ever, the full tracklist was scheduled to hit major platforms this spring. 50 years later, a half-century-old collection of songs finally getting a digital rebirth. And Sedaka wasn't treating it like nostalgia. He treated it like a fresh launch. He promoted it personally, shared piano clips, directed fans to pre-save links, teased lyric videos. He wasn't relying on management or legacy marketing campaigns. He was hands-on, just like he had always been. One teaser in particular stood out. He encouraged fans to get ready for the lyric video of Love in the Shadows, pointing them toward his YouTube channel. His tone wasn't reflective or sentimental. It was energized, forward-looking, almost youthful. That's what's so striking. At 86, many artists retreat. They slow down. They quietly enjoy retirement. But Sedaka? He was leaning in, engaging, embracing the algorithm, talking directly to longtime supporters and curious newcomers alike. And fans noticed. Comment sections were filled with younger listeners discovering him through viral clips. Some admitted they had only just realized how many classic hits he had written. Not just for himself, but for others. Others praised how effortlessly he still sang, still played, still smiled. This wasn't a man preparing for an ending. This was someone preparing for another beginning, which makes what happened next feel even more sudden and even harder to process. Just 3 days before his passing, Neil Sedaka sat at his piano and did what he had always done best. He sang. No dramatic lighting, no grand production. Just him, the keys, and that unmistakable voice. He chose to perform good times, good music, and good friends. A track that perfectly summed up his lifelong philosophy. Smiling warmly, he crooned the lyrics with a kind of effortless joy that felt completely natural. You could tell this wasn't forced nostalgia. It was genuine. Over the clip, he added a playful caption encouraging fans to tag a friend that makes you feel like this. It was lighthearted, inviting, pure Neil. And then there was the line that now lingers. "I can't wait to share it with you again." At the time, it clearly referred to the upcoming streaming release of Steppin Out and the lyric video rollout for Love in the Shadows. He even pointed viewers toward his YouTube channel so they could get an early taste of what was coming. Everything about the message felt forward-looking, But after news of his sudden passing broke, fans rushed back to that very post. The tone hadn't changed, but the meaning had. Comment sections transformed almost instantly. What had once been filled with excitement became flooded with heartbreak. Some fans said it felt almost symbolic. Others described it as bittersweet. A few even admitted they replayed the clip multiple times, searching for signs they might have missed. Though, in truth, there were none. He didn't look frail. He didn't look tired. His voice didn't waver. His hands moved confidently across the keys. If anything, he looked content. And that's what makes it so powerful. There was no grand farewell speech, no emotional goodbye tour. Just a simple video about good times and good friends. Posted by a man who genuinely believed he'd be around to celebrate the next chapter with his audience. Instead, that joyful performance became something else entirely. It became the last time millions would see him alive. And then, without warning, everything shifted. There were no public alarms, no reports of ongoing struggles, no dramatic headlines suggesting something was wrong. In fact, just hours after fans were still engaging with his cheerful piano clip, the narrative changed completely. Early on the morning of his passing, Neil Sedaka reportedly began feeling unwell. A family source later revealed that he had been ill that morning, prompting concern serious enough for him to be transported to the hospital. At first, it didn't seem catastrophic. According to early information, he was said to be recovering. That word alone gave people comfort. Recovering implies improvement, stability, time. It suggested that whatever had happened was manageable. Just a brief health scare for an 86-year-old legend. But then came the devastating turn. Not long after those initial reassurances, his family released an official statement confirming his sudden passing. The speed of that shift left fans stunned. One moment he was recovering. The next, he was gone. There had been no build-up, no long public battle, no months of visible decline shared with fans. For many, that made the loss even harder to process. It felt abrupt, unfinished. Social media lit up almost instantly. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief gave way to grief. People were still sharing his recent video. Only now it was accompanied by broken heart emojis instead of applause. And because he had appeared so vibrant just days earlier, the contrast felt almost surreal. How could someone who looked so energized at the piano be gone so suddenly? That question echoed across comment sections and fan forums. Of course, no official reports suggested anything dramatic beyond a sudden illness. But the timing, so close to a celebratory release, made it feel even more tragic. And then came the statement that made it real. Shortly after news began circulating, the family of Neil Sedaka released a heartfelt message confirming his passing. The tone wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It was deeply personal. Our family is devastated by the sudden passing of our beloved husband, father, and grandfather, Neil Sedaka, the statement read. They didn't begin with legend. They didn't begin with icon. They began with family. And that detail hit hard. They went on to describe him as a true rock and roll legend and an inspiration to millions. But emphasized that, to those lucky enough to know him, he was first and foremost an incredible human being. A man who would be deeply missed, not just on stage, but at the dinner table. Not just on records, but in everyday life. That human framing changed the mood instantly. Within minutes, tributes from fellow artists, producers, and longtime collaborators began pouring in. Some credited him with shaping their songwriting approach. Others spoke about his generosity behind the scenes, stories of quiet mentorship, late-night studio advice, and encouraging words given when cameras weren't rolling. Fans, meanwhile, turned his final social media post into a digital memorial. The comment section transformed overnight. What once read, "Can't wait," and "Legend" quickly became "Thank you for everything" and "Rest easy." Many shared memories of growing up with his music playing in their homes. Others admitted they had only recently discovered his catalog through viral clips, and were shocked they hadn't explored it sooner. Even younger creators began posting piano covers in tribute. His melodies resurfaced across platforms. Snippets of interviews, old performances, and behind-the-scenes clips started circulating again, almost as if the internet collectively decided to archive him properly this time. And perhaps the most striking reaction, the overwhelming sense of gratitude. There wasn't scandal dominating the headlines. No explosive drama overshadowing the moment. Just appreciation, respect. A shared understanding that an era had quietly come to a close. But to truly understand why this loss feels so heavy, you have to look beyond the final post. Because Neil Sedaka wasn't just another nostalgic name from a bygone era. He was one of the rare artists who survived every shift the music industry threw at him, and kept smiling through all of it. His career didn't follow a straight line. It had explosive highs and quiet setbacks. Early fame and the pop explosion of the late 50s and early 60s turned him into a household name almost overnight. Then the industry changed. Sounds evolved. Trends shifted. And like many of his peers, he faced a period where hits weren't coming as easily. For some artists, that's where the story ends. For Sedaka, it was just intermission. Instead of disappearing, he reinvented himself. He leaned harder into songwriting, crafted melodies that other artists turned into smashes, quietly rebuilt momentum. Then came a comeback that surprised even critics who had counted him out. It wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. It was strategic. That resilience became his trademark. Behind the polished smile and upbeat piano riffs was someone who understood longevity. He adapted without losing his identity. He modernized without chasing trends. And through it all, he maintained a reputation for kindness in an industry often described as cutthroat. There were no major public feuds defining his name, no explosive scandals dominating his legacy. Instead, colleagues often described him as disciplined, gracious, and intensely dedicated to craft. And that dedication showed, even in his final days. At 86, he was still rehearsing, still promoting, still engaging directly with fans, still believing that a 50-year-old album deserved a fresh audience. That kind of drive doesn't come from ego. It comes from love. Love for the music and love for the people listening, which makes the image of him smiling at that piano even more powerful. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was a reflection of a man who had weathered decades of change and still found joy in the same three things he sang about: good times, good music, and good friends. And here's the part that feels almost unreal. The release was already scheduled. Long before anyone imagined saying goodbye, the streaming debut of Steppin Out had been locked in. Promo clips were rolling out. Pre-save links were live. Lyric videos were queued. It was meant to be a celebration, a 50-year milestone bringing classic songs into the digital age. Instead, it became something else entirely. When Neil Sedaka passed away just weeks before the launch, the project transformed overnight. What was designed as a revival suddenly felt like a farewell gift. Fans began pointing out the emotional weight of the timing. He had been actively counting down to April, personally inviting listeners to get ready to groove, smiling while promising, "I can't wait to share it with you again." And now they would be experiencing it without him. Streams surged almost immediately after the news broke. Longtime supporters revisited the album with fresh ears. Younger listeners discovered it for the first time, not as a retro curiosity, but as part of a living legacy that had just come to a close. Some fans online began speculating, gently, respectfully, whether he somehow sensed time was limited. There's no evidence to suggest that, no reports indicating he believed the end was near. But when an artist's final public message revolves around gratitude, joy, and sharing music again, it's natural for people to read deeper meaning into it. Maybe that's just how grief works. The truth is, he was planning forward, looking ahead, building momentum. The anniversary release wasn't positioned as nostalgia. It was positioned as continuation. And that's what makes the timing so bittersweet. Because instead of marking a new chapter, Steppin' Out now stands as a closing one. A bridge between past and present that he helped build, but didn't get to walk across with the fans he was so eager to celebrate with. And when you listen to those songs now, knowing what happened just days after his final post, they don't just sound like music. They sound like a curtain slowly falling, without anyone realizing it was the final act. In the end, the story of Neil Sedaka's final days isn't defined by drama or scandal. It's defined by joy, connection, and a quiet wisdom that only decades in music can teach. His last post, full of smiles and piano chords, was meant to celebrate music, friends, and life itself. "I can't wait to share it with you again" sounded simple then, but now it resonates differently. A farewell hidden in plain sight, almost poetic in its timing. Fans will remember him not just for the hits, the decade-spanning career, or the awards. They'll remember the warmth behind the smile, the resilience behind the melodies, and the generosity that ran deeper than any spotlight could reach. That same warmth, the philosophy of good times, good music, and good friends, became his final gift. Even in death, his music continues to bring people together. Streaming platforms buzz with renewed energy. YouTube videos replayed, social media threads shared. Generations old and new are connecting through the same songs he loved to perform. And that's the kind of legacy most artists only dream of leaving. Neil Sedaka's final message reminds us of something simple, yet profound. Joy and art are timeless. Even when life ends abruptly, the music, and the love it carries, never does. He may have left the stage, but his songs, his smile, and his philosophy linger, quietly shaping memories, one note at a time. Sometimes the last goodbye doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it's just a smile at the piano, a song shared, and the promise to come again, even if we never get the chance to hear it in person. And for Neil Sedaka, that was exactly the kind of farewell he left behind. Gentle, heartfelt, and impossible to forget.